I'm here in the canyons of California for the launch of the brand new 2024 Toyota Tacoma. Now before Mark gets in this thing and puts his dirty mitts all over it and lives with all the flies in this truck, I'm gonna walk you through some of the engineering tidbits. Sheldon, the chief engineer, walked through this vehicle with us at its launch in Hawaii, so this is gonna be more of a general overview. This is now on TNGAF, Toyota's global truck architecture. It's the same platform that the Tundra and the Land Cruiser are on, versus the Tundra, which is honestly more relatable. This is a more maneuverable, shorter wheelbase vehicle. It's been designed to focus more on maneuverability and suspension articulation versus towing stability. And honestly, most of that, while there are suspension geometry changes, comes from the decrease in wheelbase. The next thing to talk about is this has now gone towards coil springs. While the base work truck, purely from a cost perspective, still gets leafs, all the higher trims get a coil rear end or a 5-link, which dramatically improves the drivability of this vehicle. It handles better, it rides better. The frame itself is also far more rigid than the outgoing Tacoma, which means less NVH. It's a more refined, better driving experience. You get a little bit more legroom in the back, and your hip to ankle ratio is far improved, which means the seating position's better. It's a more comfortable vehicle. And despite its increase in overall dimensions, it's honestly not that much heavier than the outgoing truck. The controversial bit of the new Tacoma is the V6 is no longer with us. Take a moment and cry a little bit. In its place are two corporate 4-cylinder options. You get the iForce Max, which we have not driven. It's their highest output, most expensive engine. It's a 4-cylinder turbocharged hybrid power plant. It's supposed to get tremendous fuel economy, makes over 400 foot-pounds of torque. The volume engine is the 2.4. It's turbocharged, it's another 4-cylinder. While it makes far more torque than the outgoing V6, it makes about the same horsepower. The big difference is how it delivers its power. The torque comes in at 1700 RPM, which is substantially lower than it used to in the V6. It's honestly only about 10 to 12% more fuel efficient. The big difference is these engines have now been paired to far more capable gearboxes. Gone is the old 6-speed, in its place is Toyota's corporate 8-speed. While it's different for the Tacoma, the shifts themselves are far smoother. It's not something you think about in the 6-speed manual. It's largely the same, but it feels a little bit better to use. The big question people have is reliability. Toyota claims that 50% of the parts on these corporate engines and drivetrain components are different, mainly because the QDR, or the quality durability cycle for trucks, is commercial, which is about 50% more difficult to pass. So things like cooling, oiling solution, bearing parts, whether or not that means this thing's going to be any more as reliable as a V6 is yet to be seen. But with that said, it's time for Mark to walk you through the interior and exterior. Check that door for heat.
God, it stinks in here. So this is Jack, right? He's like, "Hey man, I got a big surprise for you." I'm like, "Oh, what could be more important than being on my yacht with all my female fans?" Well, I have my answer. I'm in a new Toyota Tacoma, and it's got me so hot and bothered I got the stutters today. People have been waiting for this, and Jack talked about the technical stuff. You know, it's very, very important to Toyota to have this truck right. And on the interior space, what I will speak to is they were really, really curious. Is it better? How do you think it feels? We put so much work here. And it's one of those where you get in it and you know that it's working because you don't have to think about the way you utilize it. The storage is better, like door storage, for example. We complain about this on a lot of Toyota or Lexus products where you can't fit a bottle in the door. Well, if you can't fit a bottle in the door, then you got serious problems here. There's storage for your phone, wallet, knickknacks, tools, like the dashboard has a cubby, like the center layout of the center stack is really good. You put your phone in here, it's not gonna fly out like a projectile and incapacitate your passenger. I mean, everything is physical as well. Like steering wheel controls are still the traditional matte buttons. Like they haven't thrown away the things that made the old Tacoma great and just took the lessons that people complained about for the past 75 years and improved them. So you're not gonna fumble, you're not gonna be pissed off using this thing, and the big thing is the comfort. And it says a lot when you get in and you don't think about the fact that, like, oh, I need to keep adjusting my seat, or I need to keep fucking with the steering wheel or messing with it to feel like everything works well. I can put this in the gear, I can set my seat once, I can set the lumbar support once, and I'm good to go. You can drive it for a long period of time, and that combined with the refinement of the updates of this makes a huge difference. Now, clearly, technology has been put more to the forefront here. You have a different camera system, obviously on the upper trim levels. And, you know, if you're big on screens, they got you covered there too, because this thing is bigger than my grandpa's TV back from the 1970s. It is so big, it's so massive that, you know, I'm sure if you get in here, you're gonna be blown away by it. But everything else really, aside from that, is zero gimmicks. It really is a great interior space for a truck, and I think people will really appreciate it. But it's time to get into the nitty-gritty of how this thing drives and then take it briefly off-road.
Mark, you know what time it is?
Tell me what time it is.
It's taco time. It's not even Tuesday, Mark. We're in the all-new Tacoma. It's got a 4-cylinder. This is an automatic. We are in the SR5 grade. We've had the pleasure of driving various trim levels throughout the day. We've spoken to the engineers. I guess my first question for you, Mark, is how do you feel about the 4-cylinder? Because that's the most controversial part about this entire truck.
I mean, to be fair, like, you're choosing the old truck because the 6-cylinder was bulletproof, the transmission was bulletproof, there's nothing to do. The big complaint was fuel economy, and it was slow. So this fixes all of that, aside from we don't know reliability-wise how it's going to hold up. Turbocharged 4-popper, it doesn't sound great, but the first thing that you're going to notice driving this is the trans tuning is light years ahead. It responds quick to downshifts, upshifts. It doesn't lag, delay. It seems to find the right gear faster.
It doesn't gear hunt?
It doesn't gear hunt. Like if you're towing with this thing, you know, it's going to get in the right gear quicker. It's not going to need to drop down as far to get the power going. And then, of course, the 4-cylinder is a lot more responsive. You don't have to deal with like the sluggishness of the old truck. So the only thing really to complain about is, you know, it still sounds like a rattly ass 4-cylinder despite their noise cancellation algorithms that they put through, you know, the car. But I don't really think people are going to care about that because the performance is so much better than the old one.
Yeah, once we drive the hybrid variants at a later event, I'm curious to see how all that extra torque feels, both through the gearbox and honestly the fuel economy is the big thing. Right, this class of vehicle, the Colorado is a 4-popper only. This is now a 4-popper only. And the Ranger, you know, yeah, you can get the Ranger Raptor, but I have a feeling the vast majority of those will be sold with the 4-cylinder as well. It's an interesting time for these trucks from a dynamics perspective. You know, we're on the worst kind of road for a big truck.
Yeah,
really tight, technical. It's funny that Toyota has us out here driving this road, the togays of California. But honestly, unlike something like a Gladiator or the old Tacoma, it doesn't feel anywhere as cumbersome. It feels far more maneuverable than the Tundra. We're in the cheapest non-leaf spring variant, and the ride quality is still pretty truckish, if I'm going to be honest. Once you get into the Bilstein-equipped vehicles or the Fox-equipped TRD Pro or Trail Runner, the overall ride quality does improve. The AVS or the Adaptive Damper Limited also feels softer than this, but honestly, for $40,000-ish, a little bit over 40 grand, it's a pretty decent sort of like utility truck. It's not bad to drive. It doesn't lane wander. The front end's pretty maneuverable. It's basically the old Tacoma that you know and love with a much better interior package, which we've already talked about, with a more efficient drivetrain, potentially questionable reliability, but dynamically in a road like this, it's much, much better to drive. And what it translates to in traffic is a vehicle that's less fatiguing to drive on long journeys.
Yeah, it doesn't feel as slow. Like, not when I say slow, I don't mean like speed-wise. I think, to your point, it shrinks its size down with the way they've set up suspension, the way they've set up steering, and all of that. It leads to a far less vague driving experience.
To my subjective feel, on a longer journey or on a road like this, it isn't going to be as fatiguing because you have extra confidence. You're not as worried about what the truck's doing through corners. You feel like you don't have to manage the mass as much. and the extra maneuverability, particularly of the front end, is a massive.
Well, it doesn't have that like really big disconnected feel front to rear, and it doesn't have the odd like porpoising and side to side motions of the old truck. It's just more controlled and more planted, and there's less dive, there's less squat, there's less lateral motions. It feels much more flat than the old truck. And even out here, this is where you really notice it, and this is not where most of the people are going to be driving this truck, but that's why it's better overall, because it's a 360 approach, like better engine, better transmission, better body control, ride control, better braking. Yes. Everything is more immediate to it without making it feel difficult to maneuver. Yep. And it's not too sharp where it's like, why is this thing so overreactive? So even when you're towing, you're going to appreciate that, or you're hauling things, it's going to feel more maneuverable even that way loaded up.
Yeah, the ride quality too, just thinking about it from a regular person perspective, it definitely, particularly in the SR5 with the twin tube shocks, still feels like a truck. But at least to my butt, this vehicle feels like it is a little bit more isolated in a good way. Yeah. Versus the older Tacoma. This still feels like an older truck. I don't think the mid-size trucks feel anywhere as good as the full-size trucks to drive yet. I mean, they are a much lower price point, but compared to the older vehicle, this is it's a pretty big step forward.
Well, let's put it this way. You were taking the SR5, one of the lower trim levels that's non-leaf spring.
Yeah.
And you don't have the best dampers, you don't have adaptive dampers here, and it's still really good to drive.
Yeah, particularly, again, for the class of vehicle it is. But Mark, let's go take this bad boy off-road.
Sounds good.
So we're in the TRD off-road, and we are just completing our off-road drive, Mark, and this handsome gentleman with us from Toyota has guided us through this, so I don't total their truck. How does it feel from the second row, sir?
I mean, you know, with me looking down at a screen, I'm barely getting car sick at all. You know, clearly this is hard to judge its capability because we're not driving the other Tacoma back-to-back. But what I will say is, much like a street drive, it's not a big surprise that the ride refinement and comfort of this car or truck is way better. It feels far less bouncy. It feels more controlled, more stable than, to my memory, the previous Tacoma. How does it feel behind the wheel, namely with a manual gearbox?
Honestly, Toyota's crazy enough to give journalists a manual in the off-road course, and by no means am I particularly brilliant at doing this, but it is shockingly easy. I mean, this guy has been doing this now for how many days?
23.
Oh, I'm sorry, you've been doing this for 23 years, but...
3 days.
3 days, and all the I mean, how has it been for them, for most of them in the manual?
Like you said, everybody gets kind of shocked at how easy it is to drive it. They're very apprehensive at first, and then they leave very surprised.
Yeah, honestly, if you like the Tacoma and you like the manual transmission element of it, there aren't a lot of cons with this. Yes, the 8-speed's easier to do this with, and it's a much better gearbox than it used to be, but the manual's nothing you should be scared of. But with Mark, I think it's time for us to wrap up this very long video.
Yeah, sounds good, Jack. I can't wait to get out of the back seat of this thing.
Final thoughts on the 2024 Toyota Tacoma. This was a launch program, so let me be clear, we did not get a lot of time with this truck, and we did not drive the hybrid variants. Hopefully in the future, we'll be able to tell you how the Trail Hunter and the TRD Pro both drive. I will say though, this 2024 Tacoma objectively is better in essentially every metric versus the old truck. It rides better, less NVH makes its way into the cabin, it handles better, the coil rear end goes a long way improving ride refinement, and the drivetrain, the 4-cylinder turbocharged engine, both in automatic and manual, are faster and produce better fuel economy and just overall better drivetrains. And the interior space is a much more pleasant place to be in. You fit if you're a regular sized human. The seats are far more comfortable. It's really just a better truck in every metric. The two places it may suffer is, well, it no longer has the known quantity of bulletproof reliability. The best thing about that V6, other than the way it sounded, was the fact that you knew it would outlive you if you maintained it correctly. That currently is a giant question mark with this 4-cylinder truck. And the second con, which is largely subjective, is the way it looks. From my understanding, at least in the comments, not everybody loves the way this new 2024 Tacoma looks, and that's fine, honestly, it's subjective. You'll probably grow into it like a new pair of pants. With that, thanks for watching, hope to see you soon.